This is Wilson Richards, and today we're going to wrap up our discussion of our lowest tiers on my tier list with why I think Wilson Richards is in the bottom 5th of investigators, why he deserves to be in one of my lowest tiers. And before I go into that discussion, before I really talk about Wilson, I want to hop over to the tier list and give some additional context and information, because I feel that the restructuring the tier list is an ongoing process. Part of this is me talking about these investigators because I want to hear people saying why I'm wrong, why they think these investigators should move up. Whether it's by a spot or by 5 spots or by multiple tiers, I want to hear the counterpoints. And I think I will actually hear some for the first time that might convince me with Wilson. But additionally, this whole video series is part of the ongoing restructuring of how I think about the game, switching from campaign relative to investigator relative, because with a campaign relative tier list, you have to add an A+, and you're still super top heavy with the A+. There's no meaningful stratification. The takeaway when you look at the tier list is hot damn, everyone's incredible. And I don't really value it, I don't think there's a reason to talk about a tier list where the takeaway is that everyone's incredible. I think that doesn't provide a lot to talk about, and I'd rather talk about one that has more meaningful diversity in the tier list, where different tiers mean things, and I think that's really only gonna happen as opposed to how hard do you crush the game if you compare them to other investigators as opposed to the difficulty posed by the campaign. Now, right now I've got my entire F tier moved up into my D tier to showcase something, which is that really this is a 5-tier tier list. It looks top heavy when D tier is broken up into 2 tiers, and I want D tier to be broken up into 2 tiers because Hank is so much better than Calvin. But when I was originally trying to decide how to break the tier list up, I looked at it as the best 5th, the worst 5th, above average, below average, and average. Those were the original 5 tiers I had, and then I renamed them to things that accurately represented what they were. Overpowered, very strong, strong, because honestly, even average is strong in this game. Fine, because if these investigators don't have problems necessarily, they're not going to struggle with the game, they are fine. And then weak, the genuinely problematic investigators. But I really disliked having Calvin and Hank in the same tier, even at opposite ends of it. It's not like Ursula and Monterey, where they're both very good and Ursula's much better than Monterey, but they're still roughly within the same tier. I feel like Calvin's so much worse than Hank, but if you label it as F and then you drag the F tier down, you end up with that same top heavy thing where it looks like there's not enough people in the bottom tiers. And that was something people were discussing in the comments that helped me realize my F tier only exists to make the point that these characters are a lot worse than the top of D tier. This isn't F, this is D-. They're not just weak, they're problematically weak. There's characters that are going to fail to do exceptional things, and then there are characters that are going to struggle to function. And there are 2 different qualities in that bottom 5th that I think deserve to be placed into separate tiers to highlight just how much better the bottom of F is than the top of F. And I should stop calling any of them F because F just got removed. It's not a term we're using anymore. Now we're talking about the 2 parts of D tier. And as I said a second ago, if you look at this as roughly being fits of the character pool, where then I try to define what that 5th is and I make cutoffs at various points to see is Lily Chen really overpowered? Is Preston strong? Does he deserve to be higher? And right now I'm actually leaning towards moving Preston up, moving Ursula up, and having slightly higher density up here, because if you paid attention to the numbers just now, we're actually bottom heavy right now, which I don't think is accurate. But it feels weird saying Monterey deserves to be an entire tier below Ursula. So I'm not quite sure where I sit with that yet. We're working it up. As we move up the tier list, we're getting more refined in our thought process. But the reason I bring up this segmenting into fifths is because let's say we're talking about the 52nd best character in the game. So 8th worst, right? That's what Wilson might be. Let's get an exact number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Wilson is currently the 49th best character in the game. That doesn't mean Wilson can't do good things. I'm totally fine saying Tommy or Roland fight for my team. I don't want to play for them. I think they're not worth solving the deck building puzzle. But I'm fine seeing my teammates play them, even if I expect to be a little bit bored watching them. Wilson is definitely a character that's going to do good work in his campaign. He's not bad. He is far better than the people in the tier below him, but I think he still falls into my criteria for bottom 5th of the investigator pool. I don't think he does anything that impresses me, and this is one where I'm really open to being convinced otherwise because I'm speaking from a theoretical viewpoint. Because the issue with Wilson is, no one at my table has ever cooked anything for him they liked enough to play him. No one's seen anyone cook anything for him in the deck list that we found online. No one's seen someone play him and thought, wow, that's hot, I like that, let's try that ourselves. And it's not for lack of trying. Between us, we probably made at least 4 or 5 different Wilson decks, and we consistently come to the same frustration with tools and generally with Wilson and choose to play someone else instead. So let's get into my deck building frustrations with Wilson and talk about why I don't find myself interested in playing him and why I keep looking for a better deck, and eventually I think I'm going to give up and I'm going to play the Wilson I've got and I'm going to be underwhelmed by it. Now normally this is where we point to his threes across the board and make fun of him, but that's not true for Wilson. 3s defensively are fine, if anything for Guardians that's above average, and 3/3 proactively is not what you want to see, but because his ability is +1 skill value during skills on tools, during skill tests on tool assets, that means that this is effectively, if you only use tools proactively, 3-4-4-3, which is a 14-point stat line above the average and really strong. It opens up some interesting flex possibilities. Of course, it then means that I'm considering his ability to be a stat line, and we saw where that ended up with Hank, so I need to find action compression elsewhere. Because the second half of his ability, to reduce the resource cost of the first tool you play each round by 1, that's nice, I appreciate it. Guardian said bad economy, and giving me economy is something that I will appreciate as Wilson, that will matter. However, it's still not like an incredibly high value. It's not something I'm gonna be like going crazy for, it's just good. This is, on the whole, not like a super impressive stat line or ability, but because he's got tools 0 to 5, he does have tools 0 to 5, right? Yes, he has tools 0 to 5. I actually didn't remember that he lost Guardian 5, but I mean, what's in Guardian 5 other than weapons that aren't tools, right? And then he has neutral 0 to 5 and 5 improvised and/or upgrade cards 0 to 1 to attach to those tools. So the real question with Wilson, assuming that he's got like a slightly okay ability and that 3-4-4-3 is a good stat line for a flex, is can you make him a good flex? Can you make him a good fighter or a good clover? And if you explore the options available to tools as main fighter, there's no reason to play Wilson as main fighter. That's just a complete waste of effort. Like, from my spikiest of all spike viewpoints, that's just worse than Guardian 5. He has 3 fists that can be made 4 fists with specific tools. Just be a 4-fist Guardian and use the better weapons. What are we talking about? Wilson Richards as main fighter is a dead end. You don't do that. Where he's interesting is as flex and as clover. So let's go talk about where I'm most comfortable with him right now as clover. By the magic of YouTube editing on your end, I said we were gonna look at the clover deck that I like the most, and now we're at the clover deck. But on my end, you have missed a 1.5 hour period of existential dread, where I was like, all right, but I don't really like the clover deck. How can we improve this? Like, surely the best Wilson deck uses chainsaw, even though I have lots of problems with chainsaw. Anyway, we're gonna go through the rabbit hole together. Let me guide you on the journey I've just gone down. Because the issue with the clover deck's pretty straightforward, right? You're not using your fist. Wilson Richards obviously wants to use a chainsaw, and the main reason they would really want to use a chainsaw is because of ad hoc. Ad hoc in this deck really has no high roll, because the disgustingly strong thing Richard can do. I don't know why it's called Wilson Richards Richard, which is just like an unacceptable way to refer to this man. The disgustingly strong thing that Wilson can do, the thing that no one else can do, is he uses a chainsaw, triggers ad hoc, and then throws a pitchfork into the man, right? That's the strong thing that Wilson Richards can do. Another strong thing he can do is he can just kill someone with a chainsaw, realize he has plenty of charges left, and then use fingerprint kit on his now safe location with ad hoc. There are things that he can do that are strong here. And the problem with a pure clover Wilson, the reason I don't like this deck, is that if you're settling on Lantern as a backup, then -1 and +1 are the same thing, basically. It's not really, but they're basically the same thing. So having a Lantern with his ability puts me at basically 5 book, which means that for the cost of 2 resources, 1 because I'm Wilson, and a play action and a card, I can get to where Harvey starts, and this feels like a terrible backup plan, because it is. So if I'm all in on finding fingerprint kit if I'm gonna be good anyway, then I probably shouldn't play this deck. I should probably just play a flex character where the high roll gets the exact same amount of clues, and the low roll, instead of being a bad clover, is a decent fighter. So that's the argument against Clover Wilson that I had to work through just now, because I really don't like Clover Wilson, and the reason is because even though like you have more consistency than a Flex Wilson who's all in on finding very specific assets, the consistency you have is at a much lower power level. I'd rather be inconsistently incredible than consistently mediocre. That's not really generally true for Arkham, or for me in any card game, but specifically at the power levels we're talking about with Wilson, I look at the low roll for Clover Wilson, and then I look at the high roll and the average rolls on like Flex, and I compare them, and risk reward, it feels like Flex Wilson is better to me. Now, coming back to Clover briefly before we cover the Flex deck, the idea is basically just use Fingerprint Kit, do the job. We also run Bestow Resolve. There's really not enough stuff to fill out the deck, so this is a character where you can really justify using Bestow Resolve. You need a bunch of the neutral skills for Bestow Resolve to be sick, and in Wilson, I have 3 foot for manual decks and 3 head for guts, justifying those. As a Clover, I can justify Perception, and as a dedicated Clover, I expect a dedicated bodyguard who will likely benefit from overpower on the fist front. If you run all 4 of the neutral skills, this becomes a great draw engine, and it allows you to commit pretty much any 2 skills in your hand to a Mythos test to draw 2 cards and get +4, and it's very, very good. So this is something where it's like unique to Clover Wilson. There's room in the deck to justify doing this, and it's something that makes the deck a lot better. Beyond that, it's Backpack to find Fingerprint Kit, Cleaning Kit and Venture to fund it, Safeguard to move, Economy that you need, and Tinker to hold both magnifying glasses, or so that you can play Lantern Magnifying Glass, realize that you finally found your Fingerprint Kit, and then get it into play without discarding one of the other ones. That's broadly the whole deck. And sure, it's going to perform at a consistent enough level that it will likely do its job, but there are much better traditional Cloovers you can play, and while it's going to do better than something like a Lola will as a dedicated Clover, I see very little reason to play specifically this, and I don't really think it's that much better, if better at all, than the Four-Fist Guardians at fighting. And coming down to the level 0 deck, part of the reason I like this is because at level 0 it directly downgrades, with Bestow becoming Take the Initiative, and the deck identity continues to function exactly the same, which cannot be said of the Flex Wilson, which requires Chainsaw. This is the way you fight. It is far and away the best method of fighting Wilson has, nothing else even comes close, and as a result, this is your first aid experience. So honestly, in my starter deck, I have a level 2 backpack. I don't think I would do that. I think I would take in the thick of it and bank the experience. I think that would mean that I only need 5 experience from scenario 1 to get 2 chainsaws, and that makes me feel a lot more comfortable than having that opening scenario backpack. I'm not even joking, I am adding that to the deck notes and making appropriate adjustments. And the issue with this deck is like the most classic flex issue of all time. You say you're a flex character. It's turn 1. What did you draw? I don't know, let's go take a look. What did I draw? I don't think I'd keep that. Well, obviously I would redraw the weakness. Okay, that's really not gonna do it. I'm gonna go ahead and draw 5 more. Okay, it looks like I'm a Clover this game. I'm not gonna be fighting. Let's try another one. I don't think I can hold this pitchfork. I think I have to aim for Chainsaw. It's way better. Oh hey, it looks like I'm a Clover again, right? And this is gonna happen every game. We're gonna keep rolling and seeing what our roll is. None of that's holdable. Hey, we're a fighter this game and a Clover. We can do whatever we want, you know, once we find the economy. Because we missed the economy in this deck. This is a 5 resource cost card. Even in Wilson, making each of these 1 cheaper, that's still not happening in 2 turns without economy. And like, if we keep doing this roll, well, this time we'd only have rolled 4, but we still haven't come up fighter, right? Every scenario, this time we're a fighter, hopefully that's what our team needs, we're gonna see something in our opening hand, and it's gonna determine how we play. And if you play long enough, over some percentage of games, probably I would say like 1 in 4, I've gotten very lucky during this little experiment, you're just gonna find you have an opening hand where you don't do either roll. You don't have Fingerprint Kit or Chainsaw. And that's even before we get to the fact that sometimes like you get Fingerprint Kit and there's no clues on the map. That's very rare, but much more often, sometimes you get Chainsaw and your main fighter has it and you don't need to be helping with fighting, and the fact that you're just drawing cards is not helping the team. I really dislike flex characters like this, where you're just reliant on drawing 2 specific assets. Pitchforks are here so that if we absolutely positively have to, we can play them. They're also here to high roll with ad hoc. As for the rest of the deck, it's largely the same deck. The big difference is Wolf Mask is added. This helps us pass a foot test, which is very nice. And it's also going to more reliably trigger since we're not main Clover, and we care about the +2 fist because we're using this chainsaw, and 3 +4 for tool, +2 for chainsaw is only 6, so getting that +2 fist on the Wolf Mask might actually matter quite a lot. Coming down to level 0, it's the Guardian problem. We directly downgrade, it's very boring. The only difference is you have to take Sledgehammer as your level 0 chainsaw equivalent. It's much worse, but it's the best thing you've got. Taking a look at it, it very much is just chainsaw for 2 actions, isn't it? But this Flex Wilson is the best Wilson build I've found so far. Clover Wilson is going to more consistently perform its role, and Flex Wilson is going to have a variable role depending on its role, and sometimes no role at all and just drawing desperately to help the team. And that is a character weakness that I hate. And it caused me, as a person, because of my own biases, to gravitate towards Clover Wilson. But the fact is that if we come look at the tier list and talk about where Clover Wilson lands, I'd much rather have Marie Lambeau as my Clover, to the point that he'd probably go like next to Amina, next to Gem, maybe even there with Fingerprint Kit. I don't know how harsh I should be to him, but between like those 7 locations. The Flex Wilson, he's gonna have scenarios where he's like bottled. He's just nothing. He's just drawing and telling you that he promises he'll do something later, just like Calvin does. But he's also gonna have scenarios where he's blowing everyone in D tier out of the water and looking like he should actually be arguing for a position in B tier and not just like slightly below average. I don't think Wilson deserves to get out of my D tier. I think that inconsistency at the start of scenarios where frequently you'll just have a flex character that claims they're flex and then can't fight at all, Wilson absolutely falls victim to that. And there's just not enough good tool weapons for him to break out of that problem. I think Wilson, Ginny, and Hank are all characters that I actually, like on a good day, could see myself arguing into C tier, and for all very different reasons. But on the whole, when I look at Wilson, I just see that consistency issue in scenario 1 so much. And I can't overstate how much it does matter to me, how important I think it really is. because it drove me to play Fingerprint, or almost play. It was my original plan to play Fingerprint Kit Wilson as a main clover for Return to Before the Black Throne. That's not the whole campaign. Shows how poorly I think of Circle Undone, doesn't it? But originally I was planning on not doing Hemlock Vale and doing Circle Undone and playing this Fingerprint Kit Wilson as my clover to see if it was actually as good as it felt, if it was as safe as it felt. And like, it probably is, but I'm probably like being too nice to it putting it here. It probably deserves to be at like the bottom of D tier. It isn't a very strong deck because its high roll is nothing spectacular. It's just using a Fingerprint Kit. Whereas the flex high roll is using Chainsaw and Fingerprint Kit, managing to afford it because Wilson's economy will actually matter in this deck. I don't like the weakness of this flex deck. It is antithetical to what I want my decks to do. I want my deck to hit the ground and immediately say on turn 2 at the latest, like, hey, we can do the roll. And if you're like, hey, I'm still setting up on turn 3, you better be setting up to go straight to the moon. You better be a big money rogue. You better be like, hold your whole hand, Joe Diamond, where you do something completely cracked because you're holding every card in the deck in your hand with Dream Enhancing Serum. It better be something really weird and really powerful if you're taking more than 2 turns to set up. And with this type of flex, the thing you're doing isn't that cracked. Like, it's good. It's definitely good, especially when you're high rolling with ad hoc. But the only reason you're setting up is because you have to find your shit, and Guardians aren't good at doing that. You're not setting up to go to the moon. You're not setting up to enable a critical mass of big money or clue dropper. You're just setting up because you can't find your assets sometimes, and that's brutal. But coming back to the tier list, I think it's just like a personal gripe I have. I think he's probably better than Jenny. I think he and Hank are both in the same spot, where if you view D tier as the same thing, I'm gonna move them all back to this. These are the characters, Hank and Wilson, that are really close to breaking out. And I'll quickly show like the big shifts that are close to happening. Hank and Wilson are almost out, Preston's almost out, Ursula and Akachi are almost out. Like, those are the characters that are really close to sliding up along the tier borders right now. And I am currently bottom heavy, so I think something like this might actually happen, which would leave us with D- looking like this in a pretty small D tier, but I think a D tier is still worth existing. Actually, with Hank out of my D tier, I no longer feel like I need a D- tier for further stratification. I think saying that Lola and Calvin are broadly playing the same game as Ginny and Tommy, I think that tracks. I think Lola and Ginny are both characters with 3s across their stat line struggling to overcome that problem. Calvin and Tommy both have hot garbage bless builds. I think that my D tier is all of broadly similar categorical strength now. I think that Hank being in my D tier was part of the reason I wanted D-, and I think I'm happy to just go down to S, A, B, C, and D. I don't think I need an A+ anymore. And maybe as the investigator pool increases in size, I'll eventually add A+ back in, even for investigator relative. But for now, I think I'm very happy with having just these 5 tiers. And Wilson, by the skin of his teeth, is getting out of the bottom 5th. Wilson's right on the edge of going into D for me. I just personally hate the inconsistency of flex characters so much. It shouldn't be a thing. If you show up and you tell me you're gonna do a flex character, do both things. Don't just like tell the fighter he's 3-man fighting even though he thought he had a flex. Don't tell the clover that like you'll find clues later, you promise, and then spend 5 turns drawing cards and doing nothing. That's how I feel about the style of flex that Wilson plays, and I think most flex characters can play a deck that doesn't do that, but Wilson feels very forced into it. Anyways, I think I'm happy with this, with him just barely making it out of my D tier. He's still in this tier list, the 12th worst character, which means maybe I'm being too nice. After all, C tier is currently the biggest tier, and that puts D tier to 12, which is 1/5 of 60. But I do feel like categorically, he's not weak. He's inconsistent, it's a problem, but he's not weak. And I think he escapes D tier. I'm gonna wrap it up here. I'm interested in hearing people's experiences with Wilson Richards. I've watched the PBG playthrough with him, thought about him a lot. I've just never been particularly impressed by him, and the consistency for him just bothers me at a fundamental level. But I'm still interested in hearing other people's experience with him, seeing any deck lists you've ran. I hear that YouTube doesn't like links, but every time I've asked somebody to link me a deck in the comments, it works. So feel free to link me your Wilson decks and tell me about it in the comments. I'd appreciate seeing them. But do understand that, like, even if you've had a great time with Wilson, I've seen Leo, Sister Mary, Father Mateo, Silas, Patrice, Vincent, Alessandra, Carson, and Carolyn. Like, everyone in this tier except for Kohaku and Joe, I have seen do and Hank. Everyone except for those, I've seen do disgusting work. So like, if your Wilson did incredible things, that doesn't necessarily mean I think he should be higher than this. It just means that, like, yeah, even C tier characters do sick things sometimes. I just don't know that I think Wilson deserves to be, I'm not even convinced he deserves to be out of D tier, right? It's real close, but I think he does. For now, though, I'm going in circles. I'm going to call it here. I've been rather Incoherent. Thank you for watching. If you could do the YouTube algorithm dance, like, comment, subscribe, all that nonsense really does help the channel grow. A heartfelt thank you to everyone supporting me on Patreon and as YouTube members, and thank you for your time. I'll see you in the next one.